Shalom Alochon. B'Shenatun Tia. Ben Qablan Lochon Rabbi Shlamo B'Shenatun Tia Ayadam Shah Tash'i Taneta. Rabbi Baghdai Bigzeh Tochon or Sharokabu Daha Lele. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the Gilgamesh Festival. I'll be your chair for tonight, Shimi Ilamariam, alongside Professor Gary Trump. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Cabral people of the Derek Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on today. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us tonight. We've already enjoyed 2 incredible days of insightful lectures at the University of Sydney, and tonight's program continues that momentum with more fascinating presentations and discussions. Many people have asked why the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a wonderful choice for many reasons. Its enduring charm and success come from its simplicity. The Epic of Gilgamesh is, at its core, a profoundly human story, direct, honest, and refreshingly timeless. These qualities make it stand apart among the great masterpieces of the ancient world. So without further ado, let's begin. This festival would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors, our major sponsor, the University of Sydney, as well as Ronco Interiors, Eden Venues, Croix, Crispo and MP, Greenway Medical Hub, and Arthur Jewellery, whose work is being exhibited tonight. Arthur Jewellery draws inspiration from the beauty and legacy of ancient Assyria. Each piece carries a name and a story with colours that reflect Assyria's rich cultural heritage. Alongside its jewellery collection, Arthur also showcases art inspired by Assyrian history and cuneiform writings, celebrating one of the world's oldest civilizations through modern design. She is also a proud member of an emerging Assyrian artist collective, working to preserve and promote Assyrian culture through art. To begin our evening, I'd like to invite Dr. Ben Dawood, President of the Assyrian Australian Association, to commence this evening's program. Perfect, Dr. Ben.
Thank you, Mariam. Ladies and gentlemen, Shalom Alochon. همزمتي باشي تو بريشة إنجلسنا قد أنا أرخجي يتمودي له. On behalf of the Assyrian Australian Association Board of Directors, I welcome you all. Well, this is the third day of our Gilgamesh Festival 2025, and we still have a few more days, interesting days coming up. Tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and of course the weekend. It's an honor to me to welcome Professor Simo Parpola and Professor Stephanie Dalley and her husband Chris. You're welcome, Chris. You're not out from the picture. And also Professor Gary Trump, who really has been a great help since the establishment of Gilgamesh Society over 25 years ago. We're very grateful to your contribution, and we appreciate that a lot. A special welcome to David Saliba. He's an MP state member of Fables. He'll have an opportunity to have a talk later on here. With the idea of having this festival of 25 year celebration came from Mr. Alfred Mansour, who is the treasurer of the Assyrian Australian Association. Actually, the board took it in heart, and we run away with it. We thought it's a good opportunity for our community to have a chance to meet some of the Assyrians who they heard about them a lot. They read their book, but they haven't had the chance to see them. I know we are a small audience, but this is the way we wanted to make sure that the people who are interested in to come and listen to these very valuable and interesting subjects. The committee, we established a committee to run the Gilgamesh Festival under the management and the chairperson of Alfred Mansour. And we had 3 lovely ladies in it, Caroline Isaac and Atra Mirza, and our MC, Mariam Dero. Actually, I can't talk highly about this committee because for the last 12 months, they've been working very hard. They made my job easy because they did most of the things, so I don't have to do much. And that's the result. I mean, we're all proud of what they did, and we appreciate their effort and the time they put to get to this thing eventually come into fruition. The program, as I said, will go on tomorrow. We have different subjects for tomorrow, and so on Wednesday. And that will be in here and Eden venue. But on Thursday, we have an interesting day at Desktop Hall, which is behind the Assyrian Church. Now, Axia, which is Assyrian culture and the cultural society of youth, they have a special program for that night, and it'll be interesting to see you there. Now, I won't be taking much more long because we have important subjects to say, and I don't want you to. But a special thing for me personally to Marlon Gallo, she made the stay of our guests very homely, and I'm sure we all appreciate your effort, Marlon. It's been very, very. It is your. I won't hold you much there. Maria will come back and we'll start our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. I'd now like to call upon Dr. David Saliba, State Member for Fairfield, to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being in, for letting me be here as well. It's great to see so many familiar faces here in the crowd. I guess and to the visiting professors as well from Oxford and Finland, thank you so much for visiting Fairfield, visiting Australia, and for sharing your knowledge and works. I've already spoken previously to probably many of you about, but just for our guest's sake, about the courage and resilience of the Assyrian people. Obviously throughout history, it's a story of resilience, overcoming challenges, persecution and the like in ancient times, but obviously recently, particularly in Iraq and Syria and Australia, particularly Fairfield, welcoming many people from the Assyrian backgrounds here to have a home that they can feel safe, have a home that they're welcomed, and have a home to rebuild. And you're seeing that right now with such a flourishing community within the Fairfield local government area. It's around about 210,000 people within this LGA, and the Assyrian community's played a strong part with respect to the fabric of our society here for decades and decades. And as you can see, it's a small community across New South Wales, but a very, very, very passionate community, especially so given the fact that we don't have a homeland right now, and we don't have a government to provide that institutional support. So we rely upon these organisations such as the AAA and other organisations that we see here to ensure that the legacy of the Assyrian people move on. And when I reflect, and to be fair with you, I'm a person of Assyrian heritage. My dad was Assyrian. I am learning more about Assyrian culture, particularly as a member of parliament, and it forces me to actually read into a lot of things. And when I hear the story about Gilgamesh, that's how you pronounce it, reading the story there, well, not reading the story, but reading about the story about one of the earliest literacy works in history dating back almost 3,000 years. And when you look at the themes of that in terms of sort of the shortcomings of humanity, the chasing of immortality, and realizing that you can't escape death, but your legacy is built on by building a just society. Those themes are evident more than ever. And when you look at the world today with respect to obviously in Europe and the conflict that's happening around the world, now more than ever, those themes are important to learn, to remember and sort of use to ensure that we do create a just society. And I just wanted to say, just to the crowd here today, thank you so much for your contributions to our community, but also to the Assyrian community. This stuff wouldn't happen. These events, the remembering stuff here wouldn't happen if it wasn't for you continually turning up, you continually advocating, and you continually ensuring that legacy moves on. And I'm proud to say that there are younger people at the back of the room, and more younger people are coming through and learning about this, about their heritage, because as the years go by, it's ideas that transcend time. And so today, this festival is a celebration of ideas, and hopefully these ideas still endure for millennia to come. So I'm very excited to hear about the work that you do, but I have to pay tribute also to the various organizations, including the AAA, for organizing this. I know it's been every year, it's a lot of work. I've spoken to many of you about this festival this year and the work that you've done. You put up with a lot. Trust me, I understand that in terms of all the dramas and all the things that you have to do, but the results in the pudding, and you could see that many more people are still engaged. And so welcome. And for everyone else, I'm looking forward to learning what happens tonight from your lectures, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saliba. Next, I have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Emeritus Gary Trump from the University of Sydney, who is also a patron of the Gilgamesh Festival, who will introduce our first speaker of the evening. First speaker of the evening, Professor Stephanie Dalley. Professor Trump is Emeritus Professor in the History of Ideas in the Department of Studies in Religion at the University of Sydney, where he held a personal chair for 10 years. Educated at the Universities of Melbourne, Monash, Oxford and the Australian National University, Professor Trump has written over 15 books spanning early Christianity, religions of Melanesia, and the histories of ideas, among many other areas of scholarship. Please welcome Professor Gary Trump.
You have to be a long-distance runner. Anyway, Slima and Masamelaba, and very good to be here. I must say, first honourable member, it's nice to have you here, and President, Treasurer, he's a little hero of mine, Alfred and his team. I mean, what an amazing job they've done. Now, I'm going to reconnect you, I suspect. Most of you have been to the conference at the University of Sydney. Could you raise your hands if you have? Not as many as I thought. Okay, so this is going to be quite difficult. First of all, I must thank Mariam for a beautiful description of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The conference we're having and you're about to enter, and I'm your kind of guide really from the University of Sydney, has started off definitely about Gilgamesh and the epic concerning him. So I'll bring you up to scratch. We've got these two brilliant emeritus professors who are Assyriologists, and they don't seem to be, or they have not seemed to be saying quite the same thing, and it might be very confusing to those who just come fresh and those who've been in the conference anyway, because it was a tight ship, I can tell you, trying to run a conference in the Chalchak Museum. So, on the one hand, you have the inimitable Stephanie Dalley from the University of Oxford talking about the different texts that concern Gilgamesh and the different versions of the Gilgamesh epic that go way back. I mean, no, we're not talking about 3,000 years, we're talking about at least 4. Now, on the other hand, we have the brilliant Simo Parpola from the University of Helsinki, who is the master of Neo-Assyrian. He is a great expert on the time that you people are most interested in. And we've got to feel into what he's saying about how Assyrian might seem this epic is. Can I ask you a question? Raise your hands if you think the Epic of Gilgamesh is an Assyrian document. Okay. So that's a critical minority. Good. Because it's not. I mean, it is in one sense we're going to talk about. We're getting to this point in this conference, but it is definitely pre-Assyrian. And its main texts are in Akkadian and an old Babylonian version of Akkadian. So how do we know it's not Assyrian, by the way? Anybody got a clue? Well, it makes no mention of Ashur. Makes no mention. So, I mean, you've got to take into account that originally its context is outside the time where the high god of the Assyrians was very looked up to as a symbol of incredible support in the might of the Assyrian Empire as it emerged, particularly under Sargon II. We had a lecture from Professor Parpola about Sargon, and he's presented to us all what is a breakthrough, an Assyrian dictionary. And I think some of you have got a copy of this and are delighted by it, because this is coming out of, the 700s BC, at the time when, I think Sargon II was probably the first guy in the universe who said, I want to conquer the whole world. Very important claim. So we have to take into account, you study the Epic of Gilgamesh as a text in itself, and then you might go a step further to discover how later on, because it was discovered in an Assyrian king's library, Ashurbanipal, how it might be used, Assyrianized, if you like, at the great times of the Assyrian Empire. You've got to get educated about the feel of what we're doing in this conference. Otherwise, we could be thinking that we're going in completely different directions. But we're trying to now go even beyond this, because, look, the next speaker, Professor Stephanie Dalley, is going to talk about the downfall of the Assyrian Empire and continuity beyond that. Very important. But we're going ahead, and some of you have missed the earlier parts, and I apologize to you that that's happened. But you'll get a feel of what we're doing, I believe, and enjoy yourselves. And I have had my great pleasure the chance to introduce again the inimitable Emerita Professor Stephanie Dalley, who is going to talk, as I said, about fall rather than rise. And we can go over some of these points again in the course of our conversations. So, merci, and I invite some.
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you. And especially to Gary for a very perceptive introduction to my talk. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and the welcome we've received and the interesting arrangements for your association have really amazed us. So thank you in advance for that. In this talk, we will trace the growing evidence for transformations of the Epic of Gilgamesh over a period of 3,000 years. The Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, from which we mainly know the standard version of the epic, took place as part of a much longer story. Fragments of text come from diverse cities, from the Levant to Central Asia. They are written in various scripts and languages, including Aramaic, Middle Persian, Arabic, and Greek. We can recognize and trace them chiefly by identifying the names of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and Humbaba. The epic, or parts of it, survived the fall of the Assyrian and then the Babylonian empires, but shifts in languages and scripts went alongside a change in writing methods. This leaves us with much less surviving evidence because alphabetic scripts were written on parchment, which decays, and not on clay, which is inorganic and survives the passage of time, except, of course, in a flood when it turns to mud. Under revision is what happened to Babylonia on several occasions, first when it was conquered by Persians under Cyrus II, then by Alexander the Great, and then when the Parthian Persians took over towards the end of the first millennium BC. Scholars had assumed until very recently that great cities were abandoned at the fall of great empires, that knowledge of the Epic of Gilgamesh died out, that a tidal wave of Hellenism, Greek cultural influence, swept through the whole of the Near East, with survival of other indigenous literature restricted largely to the Hebrews. But now, from new excavations, archaeologists are discovering what happened to Assyria after the sack of Nineveh and the other royal cities around 612 BC. Religion and culture persisted in some cities, but without a royal center, which means that the cities did not strike their own coins. Without dated clay tablets, chronicles, or coins, establishing exact dates can be very uncertain. Few of the fragments of text preserve dates, but nevertheless, clear continuity of some kind is represented by those precious relics. When my colleague Andrew George published his monumental edition of the Gilgamesh epic, in which he included versions from different periods and cities of Mesopotamia, it was accepted by many scholars that the great cities of Assyria, such as Ashur and Nineveh, and of Babylonia, such as Babylon and Kish, had become utterly ruined, and they no longer housed literate people with a knowledge of their literary and religious past. That is an assumption that has now been disproved. Of course, the great Assyrian cities were no longer administered by their own kings, so official clay tablets were no longer written there. But the population continued to exist and perhaps even to flourish, so there's no good reason to suppose that knowledge of the Epic of Gilgamesh suddenly vanished. The names of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and Humbaba continue on through the centuries. A recent discovery is relevant for contacts between Jewish literature and cuneiform literature from the 6th century BC onwards. Cuneiform clay tablets contain the dated tax affairs and legal documents of Judean immigrants, many of them from Jerusalem. Those people had left Judah after the conquest by Nebuchadnezzar II and were given farmland in central Mesopotamia. Their families accompanied them. They kept their Yahwistic personal names and continued to live there in Mesopotamia and to pay their taxes for at least 3 generations. They didn't return to Judah when Cyrus II conquered Babylon. A community supported the memory of Ezekiel when he died in Mesopotamia. The tomb of Ezekiel is still in that area of Iraq and is still revered. With this background in mind, it's less surprising to find fragments of a version of the Book of Giants among Jewish texts derived from themes of the Gilgamesh epic. Thus, we can pursue the quest for Gilgamesh into the Islamic period, when Arabic language and script took up the reputation of the famous hero, making him into a prophet who foretold the coming of Muhammad. In each case, we will look for traces of Gilgamesh and Enkidu and their stories and the new uses to which their fame was put, persisting in some new ways after those conquests and the changes into other languages and alphabetic scripts. There were lots of translators. This is a rather curious thing to show you, but I hope you can spot that we've got 2 different scripts there. It's a translation of a sacred text, and it's just a particularly clear example where you can see line by line a translation is given in a different language, a different script, one Semitic and one Middle Persian. Thus, we have almost miraculous evidence from texts that were not available when I was a student. The Dead Sea Scrolls, written mainly in Aramaic on parchment, which is made from leather, were at an early stage of retrieval from caves and decipherment in the 1960s and 1970s, when fragments identified from the Book of Giants were found in the cave known as 4Q. Q stands for Qumran, where ancient writings had been found in various caves overlooking the Dead Sea in southern Jordan. Some fragments were identified as early versions of 1 Enoch, a book now part of the apocryphal Old Testament, which is known in several languages. The first section of 1 Enoch in the Qumran fragments included the Book of Giants, but that section of 1 Enoch was excluded in later versions, which are more well known. We already know from the Epic of Gilgamesh that Gilgamesh and Enkidu were giants. We've seen that this week. And we can now add that Humbaba and Utnapishtim were also giants from this new information. What seems certain is that the Book of Giants became part of Manichaean literature and was regarded as a heretical work by both Jews and Christians. The Christian Baptist sects and Jewish worship. The Book of Watchers and the Book of Giants, now detached from 1 Enoch, are known from elsewhere, including from oases in Egypt and Dunhuang in Central Asia. These texts became sacred scriptures of the Manichaean religion. And I will tell you more about Manichaeans shortly. Those texts carried with them the names of the Mesopotamian heroes, which were no longer in the Book of 1 Enoch. In the Aramaic, the fragments from Qumran, the readings of the names Gilgamesh and Humbaba are now widely accepted after people were so surprised to find them that at first they said, no, that can't be right. You must have got it wrong. But it's now agreed that they are correct. But who is Enoch? In the Old Testament, Genesis chapters 4 and 5, he is the son of Cain. Cain committed the first murder on earth and tried to hide the corpse from God. His evil reputation survived into Islamic times, and there's some rather fine Islamic miniature paintings showing the Cain trying to hoik the corpse of his son away so that God couldn't see it. Now, in Genesis 4, a reading preferred by various scholars is Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he, that is Enoch, was building a city, he called the name of the city by the name of his, Enoch's, son, and to Enoch was born Irad. Very recently, a Swiss scholar from Geneva has pointed out that the word son does not occur in this genealogy, which is very curious and very significant. Anyway, how did Enoch come to be connected with Gilgamesh? Enoch's existence is also told in the apocryphal book known as Jubilees. He was a primeval man who walked with God. His name has recently been identified as a form of the Mesopotamian god Enki in a new text from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I'm about to explain. And this has been a huge breakthrough for which we're largely indebted to Geoffrey Cooley. Enki is part of the name Enkidu, which means Enki is created. In the epic, Enkidu arrives from heaven as an adult, and when he died, the wealth that Gilgamesh put in his grave was intended, we think, to buy his way from the underworld back into heaven. Enoch learned to write and acquired knowledge and wisdom, characteristics that can be compared with those of Enki, the Sumerian god of Eridu, whose temple was called the House of Perfect Wisdom. The identity of Jared, or Irad, depending on which part of Genesis you have it, is a key to the identity of Enoch as Enki. Jared was reckoned as a form of the Sumerian city name Eridu, when Sumerian Enki was the patron god. The first scholar to point out that Jared was Eridu was Archibald Sayce in 1885, and many commentators accepted his identification in the following years. Eridu was the earliest city on earth, according to a version of the Sumerian king list. The transfer from personal name to city name may seem odd to us, but there are good parallels, and of course Nimrod and Nimrud are one of the best-known examples of this. So Enoch's son Jared may be understood as Enoch, or Enki, from Eridu. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu set the watches and stayed awake all night. And we know that establishing periods of time was one of the best known inventions ascribed to Enoch. And I am very glad that I managed to get a copy of a recent book by John Reeves in North Carolina, who has done an amazing job of working on Enoch material. And I don't claim to be an expert on it. I've had to move away from my own expertise and rely, I hope, on the right scholars. The arrival of Enkidu, the twin-like companion of Gilgamesh in the first tablet of the epic, was foreseen by Gilgamesh through a dream in which a meteorite fell from the sky. Enkidu became Gilgamesh's match, so he was a giant, a companion on adventures, who died on behalf of the hero, causing great anguish. Similarly, Gilgamesh is found in Sumerian literature as a twin brother to two great kings of Ur, whose historical existence is well known from thousands now of dated cuneiform tablets of the late 3rd millennium BC. This concept of a twin-like relationship is also found strongly in Manichaean beliefs. Was there an overlap between the latest cuneiform version of the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh and the earliest version of text in alphabetic scripts that included the names of those heroes? Of course, the latest date that is preserved on a tablet is not necessarily the last that was ever written in cuneiform. The latest fragment that we have found of the cuneiform epic, a piece of clay tablet in Babylonia, was written when Parthian kings and late Seleucid kings were competing for the kingship of Babylon. The date lies between 141 and 113 BC, very roughly the time of the scrolls found in the Qumran cave 4. This does give a possible chronological overlap of the Qumran text of the Book of Giants with the latest known cuneiform evidence for a version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. First, some background to the new discoveries. Andrew George's edition of the Epic of Gilgamesh was published in 2003. And of course, it was very new when it came out, and it isn't new anymore. This is what happens in cuneiform studies. Until that time, not many unpublished fragments were known. But as his edition was rolling off the presses in Oxford, several very significant pieces came to light. One of them was the huge collection of Martin Skøyen in Norway, which was in the process of being catalogued and edited. Another significant text appeared in another private collection, and in each of these texts, these newly appearing texts, a particular focus is on the names of the heroes, which are written in very interesting and enlightening forms. So I shall now describe some of that new evidence. We have to turn back in time more than 1,000 years earlier than Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh. Andrew George published a variant extract of the Gilgamesh epic in the Skøyen collection, now thought to date around 1500 BC. That is the late Old Babylonian period when the successors of Hammurabi were still in Babylon. And this overlapped this new dynasty. The new text, now thought to date around 1500 BC, was a time when texts of the first Sealand dynasty overlapped with some of the old Babylonian kings, and these were published for the first time. This is a dynasty known from king lists, but contemporary evidence for its existence has only recently been found. The kingdom appears to have its royal centre around Ur and Eridu. Its two best-known kings have shortened names, Peshgal for Peshgal Darame, they're terrible names, and Ayadara for Ayadara Galawa. The use of shortened names can now be recognized as a characteristic of that time and place and dynasty. The logographic and syllabic writings for the main characters' names in the text are all shortened. The shortened writing for Gilgamesh may represent Gilga or Bilga. This, as we shall see, may be significant for later reworking of motifs from the epic. Tablets discovered, edited, and published since 2003, when George's edition came out, have added new spellings. All the spellings of those names are preceded by the divine determinative. The name of the sign, as most of you, I think, probably know, but I wasn't sure, the name of the sign is pronounced Dingir and written as superscript D, as you can see on this slide. I'd like to thank my husband for some of the complicated things we've done on the PowerPoint. It's wonderful to have help. Andrew George published yet another tablet from a different and anonymous private collection. Like the Skiryan texts, it was thought to come from the First Sealand dynasty around 1500 BC. The city of Ur is named in this text as the royal city, not Uruk. The names of the two main characters were represented by numbers. Gilgamesh has a number name, Dingir 30, which belongs to the moon god Nana Sin, and Enkidu has the number name Dingir 40, which belongs to Enki, god of fresh water and wisdom at Eridu. This is a vital piece of evidence. The boatman in tablet 11 of the standard epic has a Sumerian name, Ur-Shanabi, and Shanabi is Sumerian for the number 40. Dingir Ur-Shanabi is thus translatable as the man of Enki. So Enki Eridu, Enkidu, still has a presence in the narrative, helping Gilgamesh to travel across the lethal waters to meet up with Utnapishtim. George's translation of Dingir 30 as a moon god seen reminds us that Ninsun, the mother of Gilgamesh, prayed to the sun god Shamash, revealing her expectation that Gilgamesh would be immortal in heaven. O Shamash, will Gilgamesh not stand with you in heaven? Will he not share a scepter with the moon god Sin? Will he not become wise with the ruler of the Apsu? The ruler of the Apsu is Enki of Eridu, who controlled the Tablet of Destinies. His city was an artfully built mountain which floats on the water. I quote a Sumerian text. And his house has foundation pegs that are driven down into the Apsu. Enki was the primeval god of the city Eridu, who brought order into the world, for the divine powers of Eridu are as huge as the earth. The city Eridu is within sight of Ur, the famous city of the Chaldeans. The link between Ur rather than Uruk can be explained by going back to some of the earliest references to Gilgamesh. So now we are backtracking. In literary texts from the third dynasty of Ur, Ninsun, the consort of Nana, the great moon god of Ur, is the mother of Gilgamesh, and there was a forest of cedars represented in her temple complex. Nana's great temple at Ur is described in a Sumerian hymn as the house of cedar trees, as if the story of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and Humbaba had taken place there. The reference to cedar trees is remarkable, as no cedars grow anywhere near Ur or Eridu, cities which lie in a region of date palms, marshes, and reed beds. It was well known to scribes whose training was initially based on lexical texts that there was a system for representing gods, each as a number. The number 30 for the moon god is rounded up from the phases of the moon to give a month of 30 days. Less well known is the number 40, which represents the god Enki. As George has expressed it, Sin, the moon god, equals Gilgamesh. Enki is a god of water and wisdom, equals Enkidu. Thus one understands that Enkidu, sent from heaven by the gods to relieve the citizens of Uruk in the standard version of the epic, is a form of Enki. Enki therefore fits the profile of Enoch as a figure who interacted both with heaven and with earth. The presence of Enoch, Gilgamesh, and Humbaba in the Book of the Giants at Qumran can be seen as a coherent group of characters derived from the A version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. In a Qumran fragment, the watchers are the trees that protect, and in the various versions of Gilgamesh in the cedar forest, the sacred trees are guarded by Humbaba on the authority of the highest god, Enlil. In the translation of Ben Foster, which is one of my favorite translations around, Enkidu, aghast at the devastation left from cutting down the trees, says to Gilgamesh, "My friend, we have made a wasteland of the forest. How shall we answer for it to Enlil in Nippur, when he says, 'You slew the guardian,' as a deed of valor, but what was this your fury that you decimated the forest?" We will now outline what we know about the first Sealand dynasty, because identification of that new text can be linked to Gilgamesh's rule of Ur in southern Babylonia. The dynasty overlapped, as we've seen, with the successors of Hammurabi in Babylon, and began as a result of the widespread rebellion against his successor, Samsu-Iluna, in which Ur and nearby cities gained their independence from the kings of Babylon and appointed their own kings or city rulers. Its date in the mid-second millennium BC and its substitution of Ur for Uruk is informative for the history of literature at that time, marking a turning point when Sumerian literature took second place to Akkadian literature. Rulers at Ur, Isin, and Lhasa in the Deep South had begun to take Amorite names. They still wrote literature in Sumerian, but administration in Akkadian, so it's a point of transition. Babylonia to the north is represented by Babylon and its adjacent cities. Ur, in the early second millennium BC, was a center for wide-ranging literacy, including administrative texts, official correspondence, hymns, and prayers, all written in Sumerian. Most of those tablets were excavated by British archaeologists, including Leonard Woolley. They went from Iraq to the British Museum and have been published in several revisions in ancient in recent years, the information from them throws light on the city just before the Sealand dynasty took over. Remarkably, therefore, we can pick out evidence that is relevant for the Book of Giants, the much later composition which we are about to describe. A Sumerian hymn found in that archive described the god Asaluhi as the eldest son of Enki and as a giant, as Dominique Charpin of Paris has pointed out. So Gilgamesh and Enki, as Enkidu, were not alone in being giants. There were more of them around. We can add not only Utnapishtim, as we shall see, and Humbaba, but Asaluhi too. 5 giants we've got now, each with a known name in the Middle Bronze Age. At Ur, the bastion of Warad Sin has a facade of date palms that are imitated in mud brick with a spiral pattern derived from the appearance of date palm trunks. The same design is found not far away at Lhasa, and in fact, you can see the ruins of Lhasa from Ur, I am reliably told. Equally remarkable is the number of temples that have been found with facades in the north that do not favor date palms. At Tel Leilan in the far north of Mesopotamia, palm trunk facades have been found. At Tel el-Rimach, my favorite site where I was first appointed epigrapher, at Tel el-Rimach near Tel Afar, the same is true for its great temple, where 2 stone carvings of Humbaba's head show that it is not mere speculation to associate such temples with stories of Gilgamesh. As Enki of Eridu, who lived in the Apsu, Sumerian literature associates him very closely with the city of Ur. Enki's city is the son of Enoch, identified, as we've seen, with biblical Jared or Irad as a form of the name of Eridu. Enki was the chief character in a Sumerian myth, which is known as the Eridu Genesis and as the Sumerian flood myth. Also relevant is the myth of Ninurta's journey to Eridu, in which the god Ninurta has to travel to the Apsu, Enki's dwelling in the pure water beneath the earth, to receive from Enki the powers required for kingship. Oh, thank you very much. Lovely. So the great god, thank you, the great god of Nippur had to go to Ur and to get the powers required for kingship, which is a very interesting reflection on the power that Enki had at the time. And the lament over Sumer and Ur tells how Enki altered the course of the Tigris and Euphrates so that Eridu, floating on great waters, was deprived of drinking water. So the god took an unfamiliar path, says the text, away from Eridu and went to Ur. So you see the importance of the location of Enki's city with Ur. Enki's temple at Ur was built at the end of the 3rd millennium BC at the edge of the citadel, facing out towards Eridu. At that time, Gilgamesh was celebrated in Sumerian tradition as brother of the dynasty's founder Ur-Nawa and as brother of his successor, King Shulgi. Recent archaeological work done at Ur has examined the presence of a temple dedicated to Enki of Eridu at Ur, which was rebuilt under kings of Larsa. In several texts found at Ur, Enki is named very specifically as Enki of Eridu, giving the connection that's found in Genesis chapters 4 and 5. His temple of perfect wisdom, barely noticed now by scholars because it lies beyond the main area of great public buildings and royal burials. Apsu, the layer of fresh water beneath the earth, was represented in the temple, probably with a stone basin. In hymn F of Rimsin I, the Apsu, the pure and magnificent shrine of Ekishnugal, that is the moon god's temple at Ur, is described as well as sweet fragrance like a forest of aromatic timbers from cedar trees. The cult of Enki of Eridu may have been transferred to Ur, 12 miles away, to escape destructive water levels, but in fact the early city at Eridu, including its walls, is unusual for being built with several kinds of stone rather than mud brick, as if to resist the worst effects of flooding. So perhaps at Ur, the building was a satellite temple rather than a replacement temple. Enki's temple at Ur connected the two adjacent cities with ceremonies in which statues of gods could be conveyed from one city to the other by boat. So now we come to Mani and the Manichaeans, and we jump forward, remembering the names of those giants from the caves at Qumran in the Levant, but continuing to focus on the marshlands of southern Iraq at the head of the Arabian Gulf. The founder of the Manichaean religion was named Mani, born in April 216 AD. He grew up within a Mandaean family in the communities of southern Iraq. Thus, he was brought up in the same area as Ur and Eridu. Mani explained in his own account of his early life, "I separated myself from the ordinances of that Mandaean teaching in which I was reared, and became like a stranger and solitary in their midst, until the time came for me to depart from that teaching." The land at that time was under the rule of Persians, the Parthian dynasty, which was about to be succeeded by the Sasanians. The Manichaean understanding of the creation was a pessimistic one, and human life was seen as an endless struggle to preserve and extend the goodness of particles of light. Mani understood that when light was separated from darkness, darkness, which was evil, constantly tried to overpower light, which was goodness. Thus, Manichaeism was a religion of light. Mani rejected or modified some of the beliefs of the Mandaean community in which he was raised, in particular infant and child baptism, because he thought a young child couldn't possibly understand what was being promised on his behalf at that time. He rejected hierarchical forms of religion with sort of religious buildings like churches and priesthoods. He thought that they corrupted society. His new version of a religion included a refusal to join in wars, refusing conscription and any form of killing. But that didn't make him popular with all the people who wanted to raise armies at the time. A limited group of extreme ascetics led the movement. Their austere life was celibate, vegetarian, and literate, very literate, As scholarly leaders, their lifestyle was not expected of others, and for people who remained illiterate, painting was enormously important. The holy men of his sect were teachers who did not claim to act as intermediaries with God. Mani rejected the existence of hell and purgatory, as well as the incarnation of Jesus, which divided him, of course, from Christianity. Trees were especially revered, and if we go back to that episode in the Epic of Gilgamesh in which Gilgamesh and Enkidu cut down all the trees in Humbaba's forest, we can imagine that an act was regarded as by Manichaeans as an atrocity, just as it was in the cuneiform Epic of Gilgamesh. Manichaeans did not accept the view of Aristotle that living plants and animals were different from mankind. He thought that trees and other plants communicated and could suffer pain. So it's a very interesting new religion that has popped up, very much separating itself from Christianity and using the ancient tradition of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. A major discovery was the account in minuscule Greek, tiny, tiny letters, of a parchment preserved in the heel of a shoe found in Cologne in the 1970s. The intention behind the find spot was to save it from the pogroms of the Manichaeans, now perhaps best known from the Albigensian Crusades that took place in Europe. The text preserved most of a biography of Mani in his own words. It takes the form of a dialogue, which was long-established format for composers of wisdom literature in Sumerian, Akkadian, and, of course, by Plato. The Gospel of Mani explains one aspect of Mani's belief system, that he had a divine twin or soulmate, called in Greek a syzygos, who was sent from heaven as a mirror image of myself, my inseparable twin, to support and guide Mani as he promoted his form of religion. The basic concept can be related to the appearance and function of Enkidu in the standard Epic of Gilgamesh, and a development of it to the function of Enoch in 1 Enoch. Gilgamesh in Sumerian texts as the brother of those two early kings of Ur, Ur-Nammu and Shulgi, represent an early form, I think, of this belief. When I was reading for relaxation many years ago, a few of the 1001 Arabian Nights in an English version, I recognized a series of themes that corresponded with those in the standard Epic of Gilgamesh. The main character was named Bulukiya. Not analyzed as an Arabic name, it could be a shortened version of the name Bilgamesh as Bilga, as we saw earlier on. Bilgamesh is found in Sumerian texts and those found at Ugarit from the late Bronze Age, and the spelling survived in the Iron Age in lexical texts and omen series, which were very widespread. The motifs of the Gilgamesh epic, in common with the tale of Bulukiya, can be identified as, I give them here, traveling across the world with a male companion, a valuable text stored in a precious casket, tragic death of the companion, whose name is Afan. I haven't managed to find any connections there. A jewel garden, such as Gilgamesh travels across, and a search for a plant of immortality. The character in this and other versions of the story all have the role of foreseeing the coming of Muhammad. The Arab historian Thahlavi, who died around 1036 AD, attributed the story of an Israelite named Bulakir to a Jewish companion of Muhammad, and maintained that Bulakir was a son of Josiah. Those features indicate a Jewish source for the story. But we've lost a clear thread, and none of the great names, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and Humbaba, are recognizable. They may have been replaced by translations from some other language, and there's plenty of choice there, or perhaps the similarities in the story are misleading. But I think it's quite interesting to see the possibility that the character is connected with the rise of Islam. So, to sum up, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, evidence has shown that Enkidu, the giant, is a version of the Sumerian god Enki of Eridu, and that his name is a version of Enoch. The group of giants in the epic link up with the book of Genesis 4-6 through the names of Enoch, Jared as Eridu, city of Enki, and the reference to the age of giants at the beginning of Genesis 6, which follows the genealogy of Enoch. From those names, we can connect Enki's satellite temple at Ur with the third dynasty of Ur and explain mention of the cedar forest within the temples as references to the story of Humbaba and the forest. Cuneiform texts from the Sealand dynasty, the first Sealand dynasty, and from Ugarit a few centuries later, have supported those findings. After cuneiform script fell out of use when Mesopotamia was under Persian rule, we can trace names from the Epic of Gilgamesh through time in other languages and scripts. The linkage of Gilgamesh, Humbaba, and Enoch in Aramaic at Qumran, and later in other languages for Manichaean texts, identifies a context, first in the early version of 1 Enoch, and later separated from 1 Enoch, but taken into Manichaean scripture and known as the Book of Giants. In Sumerian literature, we can compare the twin-like connection of two greatest kings of Ur and their brother Gilgamesh with Enkidu and Gilgamesh in the cuneiform epic, and with the Manichaean concept of the heavenly twin who guided Mani in his religious reform. Many twists and turns, variants and changes have occurred along the way, but I think the threads that bind are now traceable. Throughout runs the background of an era when giants lived on the earth. In the book of Genesis, by comparing the era of giants, which follows the genealogy of Enoch, with the long-known finding that Jared or Irad is Enki's city Eridu, we can connect Enki's temple at Ur with the third dynasty of Ur. So I hope that's been not too much difficulty for you all, but I know how learned many of you are, and I just hope that you find this at least a very interesting new development in studies of the Gilgamesh epic. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Stephanie. Hadi itlan khabarsat in itlokhum buqara. Professor Stephanie, yep. So we've got a few questions. Hadi, may I have a microphone? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dalley. Yet another great lecture. Thank you. So my first question, has there been any evidence or explanation how those tablets end up being in Ashurbanipal library? And do you think there might be other versions somewhere else?
I think we have to wait for the next phase of the study in the British Museum. As I expect you know, they've got the most splendid team of people working on Ashurbanipal's library. And what is rather extraordinary is, for example, how many copies we've got of the flood tablet, and other parts of Gilgamesh epic are not represented as far as we've found at all. So it's extremely difficult to evaluate at this stage of research, I think. So I don't know that I can say anything very useful about it. It is really quite mystifying as to why there is such an imbalance of parts of the Gilgamesh epic that have come to light. And maybe it is that, the exam curriculum required everybody to learn that bit of the epic, and they were all copying it out. But why? But there are a lot of variants. I can't really understand it myself yet. So I'm sorry not to answer your question particularly well, but we'll have to wait. They're working very hard on it in London.
London. Thank you, dear Professor. It's very evident that there is a link between the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Epic of Creation, and maybe Enki or Ea is the link. So I think the authors of the Epic of Gilgamesh were aware of the Epic of Creation, and from yesterday or the day before, we saw also a link with the Epic of Etana. So that's another evidence that there is some link between these epics, and maybe can give us a teaser about the authors. But the question is, can this be a series of literature? Are these epics related to each other as a series of literature over theology? Or there is no link at all between these epics, in your opinion or understanding?
Well, one of the problems is that we can't date the rise of the Epic of Creation. And that's a big problem for us, but we don't seem to have really clear quotations from one to the other. So that's one problem. I think from the point of view of a series of epics, it's a dangerous word to use, series, because the idea of putting things into series, like all the Gilgamesh stories or some of them selected for the different chapters of the standard version, seems to be a late, perhaps Assyrian, perhaps Babylonian fashion, you could say, to tidy things up and put them into chapters. But even then, a great deal of variation can be found in many of them. I think it's the Epic of Atrahasis that may have some bearing on what we get in the Epic of Gilgamesh. But I'm not yet quite sure exactly how to express that. Certainly the gods were on the earth, and then they withdrew from the earth, and then the flood came, and there were no giants after that. So the flood itself is a very important bond between Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, as I'm sure you know.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Sergis Georgis.
I'm at a loss to know what to talk about more formally. I will just talk about Gilgamesh, because outside this lovely hall there is a Lazarus type figure waiting to be resurrected, it seems, or actually disclosed for the first time in all his grandeur. And this is the figure of Gilgamesh, whose festival we are holding, or this is one component part of it, who's the central figure for this cultural centre that has organised the festival. I would say that we are lucky to have the 12, even though unfinished or marred, tablets of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
I tribute to Management Committee of Gilgamesh Cultural Centre, and in particular to Mr. Louis Petrus. Your determination, commitment and your outstanding work has done us all proud. I encourage you to make and go forward. I know that there are many challenges before you, but you must continue to promote, contribute to fulfill our dreams and achieve your goals. The Assyrians have settled well in their new home, Australia, and I, for one, am delighted and proud to see that today Assyrians, as part of the Australian community, are contributing and continuing to contribute. This is a sign of successful settlement in Australia.
About the possibility of the cultural committee taking an interest in our birthday, we considered the matter, as we always have to do, but we had no real difficulty in deciding that this was a very appropriate celebration to add to our sesquicentenary program, the celebration of Gilgamesh. Why did we decide that? Because it relates so clearly to our foundation, to the aspirations of the early people in the university, both teaching and governing, and because it is really at the heart of any university's interests.
this university, where the study of humanities has been nurtured, the Epic of Gilgamesh has been enjoyed for its story of courage and adventure, for its quest of immortality and the battle of good over evil. Symbols such as Gilgamesh retain their power and become meaningful when their significance is not only recovered by the community, but also shared and promoted. It is appropriate that the Gilgamesh statue is sited in the university's Faculty of Education, reminding us of the power of education to bring together diverse histories and contrasting experiences to create a better, stronger, and a happier future.
Why should not faith go weary? Why should sorrow not fill my heart? The people of Iraq are suffering, dying. Let the hand of the blessing be raised in grief.
And of course that's what this festival is about. It's a festival in which you've been able to share. I congratulate you on that. But I also congratulate you on bringing, I think, a greater awareness of Gilgamesh and his part in your society, a great history, one which we here in Australia with our Indigenous people can see goes back for so long, but in terms of those of us who have settled more recently, history is so short. And of course you've brought a symbol of that with the sculpture which will be unveiled shortly. I look forward to that and thank you for allowing me to be here and to participate.
In our function today, we are showing how different cultures complement each other when working in harmony and peace. You saw many artists of different cultures, background, presenting Assyrian pieces. At the same time, many of Assyrian artists performed pieces from other cultures. Different instruments, old and modern, blend together in such a wonderful, enchanting way. The same with our beloved country, Australia. The many become one as we build and grow our future. We are planning to dedicate the month of October of every year as the month of Gilgamesh. During we will be celebrating humanity. Our activity and function will concentrate on the development of our youth and our cultural awareness. As we are celebrating today, we must not forget other people who are deprived from the basic necessity such as food, health, shelter, and most important, freedom.
جريد يوم الذي وبغزان كل ملتها دولا لخ خديتها همونا أن شلون بتاوي بالزودة وبتزيدي ناويين نلعبها سبونسرز وسبورت بشخيلانه خيل على ملتها خزالة يا بيشقة هماشة وقايا لسورة ديان ناوي ديان أشولا إلى بيشانا ليلة دي لسوتة ملتي إلى أي بسيمة سيطة جلجامش قد أشولا قميوي لكم شنقاتي.
Will always be able to ask the question about what Gilgamesh stands for. And in the first instance, I think it's very important that it stands for the Assyrian community, yearning for the realization, heroically yearning for the realization of their own identity.
It's been a splendid day, most enjoyable, very impressive, and I'm very proud that this statue is now part of the University of Sydney.
دزوت أنا بروسوبايد برياشن قد جلجمش إلى خمن علىها جورت أتوريتا وقتلني قاربية وهمون قد بطلاب من مريا علىها قد كل أتوراية ين باولاية برشايت سبعايلة كل باول تلي قيمة تاما يولي خطوصة خبة وخدوته وشلامة قد كل ابن أما أتورايا وكل بريتا
هل بت أمان إلى ميقرأ أدوار أو إلى مدبرانا إتبت سمخت ننوي ميقرأ أدوار موينة تخمنتوخ بدها يوما
تمجت يعني خشولة رابا جبارة فيدتون خشولة رابا شابيرة من كل أرخت خزخلة مريزات تينوية إنوية خا مندي رابا معجبانا وتهار بريشة غزيلا مديانة تينويدة هم من رابا جاب جريشتون ورابا زهمة جريشتون أخشي إيوا بلاطة شولة تيتنويدو إيوا رابا من تيانا وندي يوم بغزايخ أن ناشي خاضروانا إلى خا سادوتا قد أختن جية وشرشية ومطية الداء آمنش
يطيتون مد ناشي والأخر ناشد قد مليتا جاري آيوات وراي ملتي خين الأخوة مد ناشد مارد يلبانا مد ناشد الله يدام ديتا وأترا لخا تصب مخاوي قوم تآتر همزوم ببلشان آتر شبهور
فرزانا مغبي أمان إلى يقرأ درياش ليمون دبرانا تشتابوتا مردوتانيتا وأثليتات آتوراي ميقدر ياوش مين خوشياتك وتخمنياتك بخرجة اليوم
اتمجت جاي قيمتها بغزاي بين قدرني متخت سريشن جو سيدني هتخا شولة جبارة دينا قيمة بي آتوراي جو سيدني آشولة بتمغزي قيالا ويالتيالا كنت آور قدايا يونيفرسيتي طاور مخاب قاري لشمت آتوراي لخا لدا كيبا ولدا خزيلة تمثال وبتاخر باباواتي وساونواتي وكل آتوراي تينا بليطة من ميدل ايست هي لخا
رجعنا مغبى أمان إلى مدبرانا التلفزيون آتوراي الجرمن يقرأحو أو تحضير من جرمن في شعيد قداها نسبت فشاركتها جو يوم زياخة قيمة الجلجامش مرفونو نحو مودي وتخمنتخ فكرة ديوخ بداها عودوثا
احنا عنا قد شامعين مو تلفزيون اسيريا تي في كيت زيوحو فيستيفال جلجامش فسحينا غلبة ولو بس احنا وعميدا وثرويو بو اخرو انو تلفزيون اسيريا تي في لاتيو بس الجرماني ميقراني لينوس الى تلفزيون لو عميدا وثرويو بو مدر حمص عيو باوروبا كلها بقارة اوروبية وببريثا كلها فسحينا على لو مدى تاريخي وتصورات أثينا حزينة ومشاركين أخوي في سحوثاته وكنت يقنوا هذا مدى تاريخي ورد اعتبار
دوينا نوشي كيبا دوينا روحينا لجنوعة ميدا تقدري أن عيميدا
Professor Gary is now going to introduce the next speaker, Professor Simo Parpola. Thank you, Dr. Gary.
Okay, Lucky Tune. So, Spay, it's wonderful to be here on the podium with shorter hair than I had in those old days. Gosh, I was a bit of a hippie in those days. Now I have the great pleasure to introduce the second speaker in the day 3 of the conference, of the symposium, the inimitable Emeritus Professor of Assyriology from Helsinki, the University of Helsinki. In part of his career, he investigated a lot of things in the British Museum, so he's got a lot of things to say. This is Professor Simo Parpola, and he is Emeritus Professor in Assyriology again, who is really the world expert in the Neo-Assyrian language and its world. It's just been wonderful to listen to him, and he produced a dictionary very recently, which I hope many of you will be able to get copies of for the Ashurbanipal Library. He is going to talk about the Library of Ashurbanipal, and so its holdings, how to get some idea of its significance, and of course the importance of it for the feel of what Assyria is all about from its greatness onwards. Thank you very much. In Finnish, I should say, hey. That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Assyrians, the largest cuneiform library known was created in the 7th century BCE in Nineveh, capital of the Assyrian Empire. It grew by an intensive copying effort and by private donations, confiscations, booty, and systematic search for rare books throughout the empire. The cuneiform collection alone consisted of over 30,000 tablets and fragments, representing thousands of different titles, many of them multi-tablet works, some comprising more than 100 serialized tablets. Scholarly and scientific compositions constituted the overwhelming majority of this collection, but other genres of cuneiform literature, myths, epics, legends, hymns, prayers, philosophical and religious texts, rituals, etc., were also abundantly represented. In addition, the library contained a large collection of cuneiform literature on wax-covered writing boards, as well as Aramaic documents on papyrus and leather. There can be no doubt that the existence of this unprecedented accumulation of knowledge in Nineveh had a profound impact on the intellectual life of the contemporary world. It is extremely likely, for example, that the transmission of Mesopotamian scientific knowledge to India began at this time. The literature amassed in Nineveh was organized into at least 3 separate collections. Ashurbanipal's personal library, located in the North Palace of the Acropolis, the so-called Succession Palace. Another large cuneiform library in the southwest palace of Sennacherib, and the collection of papyrus and leather scrolls located elsewhere in the same place. In addition, a quantity of Ashurbanipal tablets was deposited in the Temple of Nabu at Nineveh, and several minor libraries were found in the other temples and palaces of the Acropolis. Further contemporary libraries located in palaces, temples, and private houses have been found in Ashur, Kalah, and many other major and minor cities of the Assyrian Empire. The tablets produced for Ashurbanipal's personal library stand out from the other Nineveh tablets by their exquisite finish, elaborate colophons, and the superb quality of their contents. Several source manuscripts and careful textual criticism were employed in the copying process in an effort to establish high-quality standard texts. It seems that behind this copying activity was a systematic effort to convert all of cuneiform literature into a uniform, well-organized canon. The Ninevite libraries were utterly destroyed when Nineveh fell to the Babylonians and Medes in 612 BC. But this catastrophe had little effect on the transmission of Mesopotamian literature. It appears that copies of tablets from the Ninevite libraries were made for Babylon's main temple, Esagil, during Ashurbanipal's reign. And the libraries unearthed in Babylon and the other late first millennium Mesopotamian sites differ little in content and coverage from the Ninevite libraries. Neo-Assyrian tablets found in an Urukite scholarly library dating to about 300 BC show that even tablets originating in Ashurbanipal's library were still in circulation in Hellenistic Uruk and probably in other cities as well. This is, in a nutshell, all that can be said about the Ashurbanipal libraries. I could go on for a long time enumerating the titles and other compositions that were included in the library, but it would make little sense because most of these titles would be totally unknown to you. And besides, because of the havoc that was wrought in Nineveh, the process of reconstructing the library is still only in its beginnings. It is a very difficult job to join fragments of the size of your thumb with thousands of similar fragments. Maybe the artificial intelligence will be of help in that respect later on. My other paper will be on the correspondence of Ashurbanipal. In contrast to the circa 1,300 cuneiform letters assignable to the correspondence of Sargon, the correspondence of Ashurbanipal is smaller, consisting of only 425 missives. This reflects the fact that many letters sent to the king were now written on papyrus or parchment and are now irrevocably lost. The extant correspondence, published in 4 SAA volumes, includes 168 letters sent by Ashurbanipal himself. to his administrators and commanders, foreign rulers, relatives, and subjects. 94 letters and reports from the king's scholarly advisors, and 133 letters sent to Ashurbanipal from southern Babylonia between 653 and 646 BC. In this lecture, I will concentrate on the last mentioned group of letters, which was recently published as SAA 22. It does not contain a single letter authored by Ashurbanipal, but almost all the letters in it originate from persons figuring as recipients of the royal letters published in SAA 21 and are addressed to the king. They deal largely with the same political and military events as the corresponding royal letters, which I will also quote. But the perspective is entirely different. That of pro-Assyrian governors, commanders, and ordinary people in mid-7th century southern Babylonia. Almost all the letters in the volume relate to the greatest and most fateful conflict in the history of the Assyrian Empire, the revolt of Ashurbanipal's brothers Shamash-shum-ukin, king of Babylon, and its aftermath, which eventually led to the collapse of the empire 30 years later. In contrast to the royal inscriptions and letters of Ashurbanipal, which were composed in Nineveh and present a biased picture of the conflict, reflecting the ambitions and personal feelings of the monarch, these letters are eyewitness reports of the actual events. Most of them were written by men in leading positions, but many were written by ordinary citizens as well, who had to suffer the consequences of the actions of their leaders. Altogether, the letters convey a multifaceted picture of the prolonged conflict, enabling a detailed reconstruction of its brutal course and consequences. Widespread famine, destruction of fields, houses and cities, robbing and plundering, killing and murder and rape. The atrocities reported in the letters uncannily resemble those lately committed by the Russians in their war against Ukraine. As eyewitness description of a cruel war, this collection of letters is unique in Mesopotamia, and comparable sources are known only from Greek and Roman times. The most prominent senders of the letters are the governors of Uruk and Ur, and the assemblies of citizens in these cities and the towns under their rule. City assemblies attested in Mesopotamia from early 3rd millennium on were an important municipal institution in Babylonia and Elam alongside the royal administration. Ashurbanipal addresses several letters to these civic bodies in SAA 21, sometimes jointly both the governor and the citizens. Of the 133 letters and fragments included in SAA 22, 104 can be assigned to definite writers on the basis of names preserved in the treating formula or by other criteria. The most prolific senders of letters to Ashurbanipal, with at least 2 extant letters, are as follows. Yeah. So, as you can see, there are 2 persons here who have written more letters to the king than all the others altogether. Bel ibn Assurbanipal's commander-in-chief in the Sealand, who has left 40 letters, and Nabu Shabshi, governor of Uruk, who has left 27 letters. Then there are 6 letters by Sintabni Usur, the governor of Ur, 5 letters from Kudurru, the deputy governor of Uruk, and Kudurru of the city of Beit Amukani, and then we have letters from several bodies of citizens, etc. The important thing to bear in mind is that Uruk and Ur were the cities that played a central role in this correspondence. The other places, Kisik and Shat Iddina, are smaller places and do not play such a role in the correspondence. Now a few words about the chronology of the letters. None of the letters in this SAA 22 are dated. However, many of them can be dated at least roughly, since they largely pertain to the period of the revolt of Shamash-shumukin and its aftermath, which includes the military campaigns against Elam and the extradition of Nabubel Shumati, of which we shall speak quite a bit later on. The most important chronological landmarks related to the revolt and its aftermath found in chronicles, royal inscriptions, economic texts, and letters are as follows. The first is the campaign against Elam and Gambulu in 653, but it is an isolated incident which does not play a great role in the correspondence. The main subject is the revolt of Shamash-shumukin, which began in 652, was crushed in 648, but had a long aftermath, which ended only 646 BC. Helpful chronological landmarks are also provided by dated and datable royal letters sent to the authors of the present correspondence. We have a lot of so-called eponym dates from Ashurbanipal, letters sent by Ashurbanipal himself. And as you can see, they all relate to the revolt. There are also letters which do not contain an eponym date, but can be dated by their contents and their counterparts in the letters sent to Ashurbanipal. And these are, of course, can be correlated with the royal inscriptions and other documents giving an exact date for the events in question. So I'm going to divide my paper into two parts. I'm first going to discuss the pro-Assyrian side of the correspondence. And after that, the anti-Assyrian side of the conflict with Shamash Shumukin. And the correspondence that is also related to its aftermath. First, the cities of Uruk, Ur, and Kisik. The cities of Uruk and Ur, both situated on the Persian Gulf or its affinity, did not support Shamash Shumukin during the revolt. Hence, both cities fell into difficult straits. However, they could not be taken by the rebels and were released from the tremendous pressure of the rebels in 650 when Babylon was put under siege. Uruk functioned as an important stronghold for Assyria during the revolt. Its governor, Nabu Shabshi, was abducted to Babylon by a general of Shamash Shumukin at the beginning of the revolt. And an Urukian named Mukinzeri, whose brother Nabu Nasir was appointed to the governorship of Uruk by Shamash Shumukin. Before Nabu Shabshi, the governor, left Uruk, he ordered the city overseer of Uruk to bring Aplaya, the governor of Arrapha, and Marduk-Shar-Usur, the chariot driver of the Assyrian queen, into Uruk to protect the city from Shamash Shumukin. Later, upon request, Ashurbanipal sent reinforcements to Uruk, which in addition to Aplaya and Marduk-Shar-Usur included Bel-Etir, Arbaya, and Nuraya, the governor of Mazamua, and Lahiru, along with 200 horses. These reinforcements are discussed in 4 letters, where Aplaya and Nuraya are referred to only by their titles. Nabu Shabshi was saved by the relatives of his mother in Babylon, so he could return to his office in Uruk. Nabu Shabshi had intervened on behalf of Assyria with the Chaldean tribe Beit Amukani that resided north of Uruk. In SAA 2126, Ashurbanipal shows his approval of what Nabu Shabshi had done to them, and in another letter dated 650, he orders Nabu Shabshi to write to a certain Bel Ushallim about Eazer Kisha, the leader of Beit Amukani, and his mother Humbushtu. The king refers to 4 different treaties with Nabu Shabshi in a later letter dated in the month Sivan, 650. He notifies the governor that he is sending 3 high-ranking Assyrians with a new treaty tablet and urges him to join the treaty. 2 of these Assyrians, Nergal-Sarru-Usur and Akulanu, are mentioned in a fragmentary context in these letters. Kudurru succeeded to the governmentship of Uruk in the year 647, but he was already active in the city during the revolt, possibly as a subordinate of Nabu Shapshi. He received, together with Urukians, 2 letters of Ashurbanipal. The latter dated in the second month of the year 646, when the aftermath of this conflict ended. In the letter, the king tells them that as a result of weeping, the gods worshipped in Uruk had become reconciled. This weeping is also mentioned in a fragmentary letter from Uruk. Ur was less secure than Uruk, and as such became an obvious target for the rebels, such as the Pukudu tribe. The governor of Ur, Sin Tabni Usur, appealed to Uruk for aid. And the deputy governor of Uruk, Kudur, also wrote to Ashurbanipal concerning the critical situation of Ur, caused by a messenger of Shamasumukin. So this happens in the very first phase of the conflict. He states that he had personally gathered 500 to 600 Urukian archers and marched to Ur together with Aplaya, Nuraya, and the commander-chief of the Sealand, Bel Ibni. It appears that the expedition to Ur was successful. Ashurbanipal commends Sin Tabni Usur for enduring the enemy and famine for 2 years. He also refers to a feud between Sin Tabni Usur and his brother Sin Shara Usur. It seems that the latter was attempting to discredit the former and probably hoping to regain control of Ur himself. However, the king states that he wouldn't listen to the slander made by the latter, and in another letter he then assures Sin Tabni Usur, the governor, that he will not listen to his brother, and thanks him for having been loyal for 3 years. He also states that the country is becoming safe, and Sin Tabni Usur can come to see him after public order has been fully restored. The rivalry between the brothers was indeed settled later. Ashurbanipal informs Sin Tabni Usur in SAA 2141 that Sin Shara Usur came to him and surrendered. The city of Kisik was located about 30 kilometers southeast of Ur. The Kisikians had built strong ties with Ur at the time of Ashurbanipal. They used an Ur-type blessing formula invoking the gods Sin and Nikal in their letters to the king. In SAA 2142, Ashurbanipal responds to a letter that the Kisikians had written to him concerning Sin Shara Usur. He assuaged their concerns by pointing out through rhetorical questions that if the troops of Sin Shara Usur were so numerous, and if he were on the alert because of the Kisikians, he would not have fled into Ashurbanipal's presence. Okay, the most important person on the Assyrian side was Bel Ibni, the military commander of the Sealand. The Sealand was the homeland of a Chaldean dynasty of Beit Yakin, whose leader Nabu Bel Shumati had been loyal to Assyria before the outbreak of the revolt, but had sided with Shamasumukin and later sought asylum in Elam. In order to regain control of the south from the rebels, Ashurbanipal appointed his eunuch Bel Ibni as military commander of the Sealand. He informs the Sealanders in a letter dated in the second month of 650 that he is sending Bel Ibni to assume their leadership. He also promises them that he has dissociated them from the tribe of Nabu Bel Shumati. Keep in mind the name Nabu Bel Shumati, you will hear a lot about him later. Ashurbanipal addressed 5 letters to Bel Ibni about his military activities. In SAA 2144, he praises Bel Ibni for having reported on the Pukudu sojourning on a canal. The Pukudu was one of the Aramean tribes who resided in eastern Babylonia and appeared as one of the main rebels during the revolt. In SAA 2145, he expresses displeasure with the fact that Bel Ibni had, without his explicit permission, invaded the territory of the Durasimmu, who lived in the vicinity of Ur and were under the jurisdiction of the governor of Ur. The Durasimmu had been loyal to Ashurbanipal at the beginning of the revolt, but later switched to the rebel side because the Pukudu and the Sealanders harassed them. Bel Ibni had a nephew named Mushezib Marduk, who worked as his ally and intermediary. In one of the letters, Ashurbanipal relates that Mushezib Marduk had been admitted into his presence and then sent on a mission forthwith, without even spending a night in Nineveh. In another letter, the king mentions bdellium and bronze, on which Bel Ibni had reported, and instructs him to send any available amount of them to the king for inspection. Indeed, in SAA 22-125, Bel Ibni reports having sent huge amounts of bdellium and bronze to the king, together with other valuables. The sanctuary of Nabu Bel Shumati in Elam undermined the already strained relations between Assyria and Elam. Assyria adopted a serious stance on the capture of Nabu Bel Shumati. Bel Ibni started working on this issue in the final year of the revolt, or during the first campaign against Umanaldas III, the Elamite king. Assyria could not capture Nabu Bel Shumati during the first campaign. However, Elam finally took an action necessary to resolve the Nabu Bel Shumati matter. According to one of Bel Ibni's letters, SAA 22-121, Shibar, a high-ranking Elamite, secretly sent his friend Bel Ubahir, for whom Bel Ibni had interceded before the king, to Bel Ibni on the 6th of Shebat. The year is not mentioned, but SAA 2665, which Ashurbanipal sent to the elders of Elam as a direct response to Shibar's message, is dated 647. Thus, SAA 1022-121 was certainly written in 647. Bel Ubahir asked Bel Ibni to forward a message of the Elamites to the palace. The Elamites were wondering why the Assyrian king had treated them so harshly. Shibar also informed Bel Ibni that Elam was willing to extradite Nabu Bel Shumati to Assyria, but only in dignity. He then explained what the messages of Ashurbanipal were supposed to be to the Elamite people and Umanaldas, the Elamite king. To the former, he recommended that the king order them to deliver Nabu Bel Shumati to him and threatened them with dire consequences if they don't comply. To the latter, the king, he suggested that he promised to make peace with Umanaldas. He that he promises to make peace with Ummanaldas if he seizes Nabu-bel-Shumati and criminals with Nabu-bel-Shumati and sends them to the king. Moreover, he informed Bel-Ibni that he had brought Nabu-bel-Shumati down from the mountains and was keeping him under guard. Finally, Bel-Ibni urges the king to send a messenger to Elam with the recommended messages and promise that all the criminals will be caught overnight and sent to the palace. Towards the end of the letter, Bel-Ibni informs the king that he will visit him with 1,000 captives in the 12th month, which tallies with the month in which Shibar wrote to Bel-Ibni. Ashurbanipal immediately reacted to SAA 22:121. He sent SAA 21:65 to the elders of Elam and SAA 21:66 to Ummanaldas. In SAA 21:65, he explains that Elam had been treated harshly because of Nabu-bel-Shumati and his accomplices, Nabu-Kati-Sabat and Kiriptu, and demands that these people be sent to him. If this is done, he promises to promptly return the exiled Elamite gods and make peace. If not, he will make the future even more horrible to them than in the past. As Matt Waters has published out, the wording of this letter is quite similar to that recommended in SAA 22:121. SAA 21:66 was very probably sent around the same time as SAA 21:65. Ashurbanipal required the extradition of Nabu-bel-Shumati and Nabu-Kati-Sabat, who threw his lord into fire and who has been staying in your presence. However, neither the elders of Elam nor Ummanaldas managed to deliver him to Assyria on this occasion. It is likely that Nabu-bel-Shumati escaped from Shibar, but the circumstances of his escape are not known. And now I move on to the anti-Assyrian forces and their leaders. First of all, Babylon. Esarhaddon, the father of Ashurbanipal, had concurrently been king of Assyria and king of Babylonia. However, he decided to divide the realm of the Assyrian Empire. In the middle of Iyar, 672, he appointed his sons Ashurbanipal and Shamash-shum-ukin to the thrones of Assyria and Babylonia, respectively. He concluded a treaty concerning this royal succession with the Assyrian citizenry and vassal nations. Esarhaddon died due to illness on the way to a campaign against Egypt in Marcheswan, 669. In accordance with the treaty, Ashurbanipal ascended the throne of Assyria in the very next month, Kislev, 1669, whereas Shamash-shum-ukin entered Babylon with the statue of Marduk and ascended the throne of Babylon only in Iyar, next year, 668. For this event, Ashurbanipal played the role of his appointer, Shamash-shum-ukin's appointer and the returner of the statue. 3 letters sent by Shamash-shum-ukin to Ashurbanipal are extant, in which he reports on affairs of Babylonia in seemingly brotherly spirit. Even after Shamash-shum-ukin assumed residence in Babylon as the king, its city assembly continued to function as the administrative body. This is evident from the fact that no letters sent by Ashurbanipal to Shamash-shum-ukin are extant. while all the preserved letters to Babylon were addressed to the Babylonians. Ashurbanipal wrote a letter, SAA 21:1, to the Babylonians, probably at the beginning of his reign. In the letter, he shows his full respect of Babylon and affirms that he would maintain Babylon's privileged status. At the beginning of 652, Shamash-shum-ukin started his revolt. Two letters written after an initial skirmish indicate that Ashurbanipal made an effort to settle the revolt peacefully, although he already refers to Shamash-shum-ukin as his no brother. But his efforts failed. The hostilities between Assyria and Babylonia began in Tibet, and two battles between them took place in Adar, 652. Assyria laid siege to Babylon in Tammuz, 650. In SAA 21:4, Ashurbanipal addresses the besieged Babylonians, making an attempt to save the city from massacre during the impending decisive assault of the Assyrian army. Eventually, the revolt was suppressed with the death of Shamash-shum-ukin in the fire and the fall of Babylon around the end of Ab, 648. Many Babylonian cities, Borsippa, Kuta, Sippar, regions, and Aramean and Chaldean tribes allied with Shamash-shum-ukin in the cause of the revolt, above all the Sealand and its leader Nabu-bel-shumati. And now to Nabu-bel-shumati. Before the outbreak of the revolt, Nabu-bel-shumati, the grandson of Marduk-apla-iddina II, biblical Merodach-Baladan, controlled the Sealand as Assyrian governor and corresponded with Ashurbanipal as shown by SAA 21:109. By Nisan 651, however, he had sided with Shamash-shum-ukin and became the most hated opponent of Ashurbanipal after the death of the king of Babylon. Bel-ibni, who had been tasked with seizing him and who spent years trying to bring him to justice, constantly refers to him with abusive appellatives and imprecations, like Baal's reject. Baal's reject, whose head Marduk has given for killing. Baal's reject, cursed by the gods. Or Nabu-bel-shumati, whose skin Nabu shall offer for sale. And may Nabu rip out his heart. Nabu-bel-shumati died in Elam. There has been so far no letter that describes the circumstances of his death. However, being afraid of being delivered alive to Assyria, he probably committed suicide. According to edition A of the royal inscriptions, Nabu-bel-shumati heard that Ashurbanipal's messengers had entered Elam, became afraid, then instructed his groom to kill him, while other inscriptions state that he and his groom killed one another with their daggers. Elam, a kingdom in southwest Iran, was often in conflict with Assyria. Ashurbanipal defeated and beheaded the perjurious Elamite king Teumman in 653. After his death, the Elamite monarchy became very unstable and fragmented. Short-lived kings appeared in succession. In 9 years between 653 and 645, 7 kings were enthroned. 2 of them had a second tenure, Tammatiru II, Umanaldas III, and 2 kings bore the same name, Tamritu I and Tamritu II. Furthermore, it is not clear whether a given king ruled Elam in its entirety. because two kings could be enthroned in different places at the same time. Ummanikas II in Elam and Tammaritu first in Hidalu. These kings, some of them enthroned by Ashurbanipal as Assyrian puppets, frequently provided military aid and refuge for Babylonians and Sealanders, although some Elamite kings had friendly relations with Ashurbanipal. In addition, a civilian administration consisting of elders and citizens existed in Elam. The revolt of Shamash-shum-ukin deteriorated the relationship between Assyria and Elam because Ummanikas II allied with Shamash-shum-ukin. Ashurbanipal's inscriptions record that Ummanikas accepted bribes from Shamash-shum-ukin, went to his aid and carried away property of the temples Esangil and Ezida. In Essay 2158, addressed to Menanu, an Elamite elder, Ummanikas is described as a traitor to whom the king had rendered favors but who had broken his treaty by siding with his adversary and trespassing on his territory. Ashurbanipal blames him for the lack of communication and urges him to reply. However, it does not seem that Menanu sent a reply, because Nabu Bel Shumati of the Sealand is called the whore of Menanu in Essay 2143. We know from the royal inscriptions that Ummanikas II was killed by Tammaritu II, who held the kingship of Elam circa 652 until 649. However, according to Ashurbanipal's inscriptions, he too received bribes from Shamash-shum-ukin, came to his aid, and rushed to fight against the Assyrian troops. Indabibi, a servant of Tammaritu II, revolted against him and occupied the throne of Elam for 3 years, while Tammaritu sought refuge in Nineveh. In Essay 2299, Bel Ibni actually reports that he has sent Tammaritu, his brothers, his family, and a few nobles to Ashurbanipal. In a fragmentary letter dated 649, Ashurbanipal calls Indabibi his brother and wishes him well. A peaceful relationship between the two kings is also indicated by edition B of Ashurbanipal's inscriptions. However, around the time when the revolt of Nabu Shamash-shum-ukin was being crushed, Indabibi turned hostile towards Ashurbanipal. In one of his letters, Bel Ibni reports that Indabibi had written to his herald ordering him to not mobilize his forces against Assyria. Edition C of Ashurbanipal's inscriptions also documents an adverse turn in relations between Ashurbanipal and Indabibi. It does not repeat edition B's story of a messenger of goodwill and peace, but instead reveals that Ashurbanipal sent a messenger to Indabibi threatening that he would destroy Elamite cities, deport the Elamite people, and replace Indabibi with someone else if the latter did not return the Assyrian prisoners. This messenger did not reach Indabibi because the Elamites heard of the message, killed Indabibi, and enthroned Ummanaldas III. About a month before the fall of Babylon, 5th Tammuz 648, Ashurbanipal sent a letter to a herald, Ummanshibar, who would play a pivotal role in the extradition of Nabu Bel Shumati. The letter indicates that Ummanshibar had contacted Bel Ibni and suggested a plan of action that completely satisfied Ashurbanipal. Having suppressed the revolt, Ashurbanipal moved to punish Elam for having aided Shamash Shumukin and providing asylum to Nabu-Bel-Shumati and his accomplices. In the third month of 647, he launched a campaign against Aldas. When they approached Elam, Aldas abandoned his royal city Madaktu and ran away, as reported in SAA 22:119. Ashurbanipal made the previous Elamite king Tamaritu participate in the campaign and installed him as king in Susa. During the campaign, he sent 3 letters to Tamaritu. One of them is a reply to SAA 21:121, written by Tamaritu while waiting in Der for the arrival of the Assyrian army. In SAA 21:63, dated 647, Elul 16, Ashurbanipal already calls Tamaritu the king of Elam and mentions Nabu-Bel-Shumati and Aldas in broken context. Toward the end of the letter, he urges Tamaritu to return his favors and guard and remember the treaty to which he had made Tamaritu swear. In SAA 21:64, he rejoices at the news of Tamaritu's victories in Elam. Tamaritu also wrote letters to Ashurbanipal thanking him lavishly for his good deeds. Later, however, he revolted against the Assyrian king, who reacted angrily, conquered many cities of Elam, and forced Tamaritu to submit and pull his chariot. The events during the campaign and Tamaritu's treachery are recorded in the inscriptions of Ashurbanipal. The Assyrian army had not been able to seize Nabu-Bel-Shumati during the campaign. However, after Shibar's peace initiative in 647, 9th month, the extradition of Nabu-Bel-Shumati and his accomplices was made a conditio sine qua non of the prospective peace treaty with Elam. On 646 Tammuz 26, Aldas finally sent Ashurbanipal a letter where he says that he has seized Nabu-Bel-Shumati and sent him to the king, though he does not say whether Nabu-Bel-Shumati was dead or alive. Edition A records that when Nabu-Bel-Shumati died, Aldas was afraid and let the corpse of Nabu-Bel-Shumati in salt and gave it to Ashurbanipal's messenger along with the head of the groom who had cut him down with his weapon. SAA 21:117, probably from the elders of Elam, relates to these events. Ashurbanipal did not allow the corpse of Nabu-Bel-Shumati to be buried, but cut off his head and hung it from the neck of Nabu-Kati-Tsabat, the Simmadir official of the king's treacherous brother Shamash Shumukin, who had escaped with him to Elam. Finally, I come to Tilmun, a kingdom located in the Persian Gulf, including the island of Bahrain. Ashurbanipal sent a letter to Hundaru of Tilmun on 647 Elul 13. Hundaru was somehow associated with Nabu-Bel-Shumati because the king mentions Nabu-Bel-Shumati and Elam in broken contexts in the letter. And in SAA 21:124, Bel-Ibni informs the king about the property of Nabu-Bel-Shumati that had been taken from Tilmun and refers to a sin committed by Hundaru. In essay 2175, the king tells Hundaru that he had seen the treaty tablet that Hundaru sent to him and was ready to conclude a treaty with him on the condition that he would be unconditionally devoted to him. Towards the end of the letter, he confirms that he will give Hundaru the kingship of Tilmun. This promise was actually fulfilled. The royal inscriptions of Ashurbanipal, which are datable to circa 638, record that Hundaru, the king of Tilmun, came to Nineveh every year without interruption with his heavy booty. With his heavy tribute, So, the significance of the correspondence of Ashurbanipal. Although many of the individual letters of Ashurbanipal's correspondence have been studied previously, they have never before been collected into thoroughly collated and in-depth critical editions, and there is still very much to learn from them. As we have seen, these letters are a very important source of information, especially for the period from the revolt of Samashumukin to the decline of the Assyrian Empire. An example of the new vistas opened up by a careful analysis of the correspondence is Michael Jursa's recent study of SAA 2248, a letter from the reign of Sin-Sharru-Iskun, which for the first time revealed the close ties of the Chaldean dynasty of Nabopolassar to the ruling class of Uruk. I hope that the SAA editions will lead to many similar discoveries and enable a more nuanced understanding of the turbulent period in which these letters originate.
So we'll just give a bit of a rest for the professor. We'll go through a few things. Thank you. All these functions wouldn't have happened without our sponsors. I'll go through them, and they are very, very important. One of them is the University of Sydney. It's the major sponsor. Eden Venue, as you can see here. And then we've got Ronco, Corex, and Chris Bowen, the minister. And then we've got Arthur Jewelry. I want to call two artists that they've done this. I want to thank them. If you can come here, please. Donald and Arthur, please. That's the artist for that beautiful carriage there. Yeah. Where's young Arthur? Okay, and Arthur is for these arts. Beautiful arts. Please explain how did you, Donald, please, can you explain about the carriage a little bit? Come here, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Donald Barco, and what you see here is an ancient Assyrian chariot from the time period of Ashurnasirpal II, and it took a lot of effort and time to bring this project to completion, and it's hopefully something that inspires the youth to interact with history and not just read it in the books. So they can come out to be Simo Parpolas and Stephanie Dalleys one day in the future as well. So hopefully it's a stepping stone to help kids get inspired about ancient history. Thank you.
My name is Atar. I'm inspired by Assyrian language and Assyrian cuneiform. So all my art is based on language. What you see today is tree trunks. That means whichever tree you cut in Mesopotamia, you will find Assyria. And there is concrete slab. There is Assyrians everywhere. And cuneiform, yeah. Cuneiform is the first language. So that's what I'm inspired of. Okay, please.
Two other artists that made this day very special is Showtime and the Video Man there. I leave you now with our beautiful MC, the chair of the day. Miriam, please. Just one thing I want to let you know. For the 8th of November, before we said the buses will leave at 11:45, now they will leave at 10:45 because of the restriction from the University of Sydney, okay? So we have to leave at 10:45. Now tomorrow's session is very important. Again, we have Emeritus Professor Dalley, which she will give us a very important lecture, which is the mystery of the hanging gardens of Babylon. And Professor Simo Parpola, he will talk about the tree of life, God Ashur, and the goddess Ishtar.
If I could please invite Dr. Simo Parpola back to the stage. We'll just do a few questions before we close off the night. Dr. Simo, please. Mani itlabu qare, if you could just raise your hand just so we can get the microphones. Yep, so we've got 1, 2, 3 over here. Anyone on this side, any questions? All right. So Dr. Daniel Sada, yep.
Thanks, Professor. Shamash Shumukin and Ashurbanipal were biological brothers, at least from one father, one ruling in the north, prioritizing the divinity of God Ashur and bearing his name, and one ruling in the southern part, prioritizing the worship of Marduk and bearing the god named Shamash. But yet they were brothers, and the revolt could have ended up the other way, and we could have ended up with a dynasty ruled by Shamash Shumukin, and probably we would have called that dynasty Babylonian. So my question and my impression here is these terms used by scholars seems to be more technical rather than indicating the people of different origin or different ethnicity or different race. So it seems that these terms make it easy to study ancient history during different periods and different rulers, rather than meaning these people are different. We understand that they are all the same people. I don't know whether this is your understanding as well, or were really these people different, like Babylonians, Assyrians, were they really different people, or whether they were just same people?
Well, I don't think that they were very different, you know. Assyria and Babylonia were states, different states, and of course, you spoke Babylonian in the other, and Assyria in the other, and Aramaic in the other. But of course, the two states communicated in every possible way, and they're certainly of the same race, if we put it that way. As for Shamash-shum-ukin and Ashurbanipal, Shamash-shum-ukin, of course, was a brother of Ashurbanipal, and therefore they had the same mother. And the difference was that Shamash-shum-ukin was the elder brother, and Ashurbanipal was the younger one. And here we enter at the core reason for the war between these brothers. Esarhaddon, who made the decision about dividing the realm between these brothers, had not learned or was making the same mistake as Sennacherib earlier, that he had tread upon the primogenitory rights of the older brother, and he made Esarhaddon, who was a younger brother, king, without thinking about what the older brothers, who had been crown princes before, would think about it. And that led to a civil war in Assyria. Now, the same thing was done again. And Ashurbanipal, being the favorite of, but younger, got the throne of Assyria. This was a fatal error, and which led to, Shamash-shum-ukin stood still for a number of years, but he was all the time making probably his preparations to rebel. And all the time Ashurbanipal was behaving a little bit humiliating towards him. So I think that you are right in saying that there was nothing basically different between them, or Assyrians and Babylonians. It was just the conditions that, created this war.
Good evening. We have seen that there is a Kuduru of Ur, and we know from some sources that the father of Nabopolassar, he was also named Kuduru, but some sources mention that he was the governor of Ur, and some sources mention that he was the governor of Nippur, that was assigned by Ashurbanipal after a revolution in Nippur. What is your opinion about that? And thank you very much.
I agree. Kuduru, of course, is in itself is an abbreviation of a longer name containing the element Kuduru.
Thanks, Professor. It was really an intriguing look into warfare. My question has to do with warfare and the letters of the king. How explicitly do Ashurbanipal's letters reveal the use of propaganda or psychological warfare to control his officials in Assyria, Nineveh, and his enemies?
Well, the real letters were not always written by the king, not at all. They were let's say, they were dictated by the king. Although Ashurbanipal could write, and we have, from the time of his crown princehood, we had several letters written by him with his own hand to his father. But he didn't write any letters, but dictated him when he was a king. And it's very funny. Of some letters we have 4 different versions, which show how they were formulated, how they came about. There was one of them is, the same letter, but in 4 different cut copies. One of them is the version that was taken from the king's dictation. And the other 3 are worked up variants of the dictated letter to improve it. So it was important, of course, that the letters be drafted carefully, and so that one would not have to regret later. And so I would just repeat that with the letters of Ashurbanipal, we have to understand these worked up versions of the original letter. Naturally, basically, they were Ashurbanipal's letters, really. And he certainly had a say about the improved versions, so to speak. And he had to always, it was always made certain that he was in agreement with them. Oh, that's it.
Thank you, Professor. Just a question. From what I can see, there's a lot of letters that have been archived by Ashurbanipal in the library. Is it like other kings have archived their letters somewhere else, or it was just Ashurbanipal who was interested in archive everything he written to, like these royal letters on other stuff that he done in his period? Thank you.
Well, I'm not quite sure if I understood the question. Could you repeat?
The whole, like, you have read a lot of these letters that have been archived by Ashurbanipal in his library. So this was like kind of royal. Every king, he archived his letters in some kind of, like, somewhere, or it was just Ashurbanipal who was very interested in this archiving and tried to put everything written in a place that will be like an archive for others to come and have it, or something like that.
Yes, okay. All the letters that were sent by Ashurbanipal were archived in his private, in his official archives. That is certain. And many of them were, as I said, mentioned, were also dated, so that the exact day when they were written is known. But as to the other letters, which were not sent by the king, but belonged to his correspondence, they, of course, were sent from outside, and I assume that they were all also included in the king's archives. But we cannot be sure always, because they are not, for instance, never dated. That was sent to him, and one would expect that naturally the person who archives them might also give them a date. But I believe they were also included in the king's archive, although there is no absolute proof of that. You see, the find spots of these letters and fragments of letters are not known exactly. They were, when the Medes destroyed Nineveh, they were thrown and broken into pieces. They were the Royal Library was ransacked utterly in an effort to destroy it. So, since we don't know we have not hit an entire article where everything would be, neatly organized and so on. So we are bound to accept that, it probably was so, but no ultimate responsibility. I would think, as I said, that they were archived very systematically where they belonged.
Yeah.
Thank
you very much. Sorry, I just forgot one sponsor, Dr. Daniel Sada. Thank you very much for your sponsorship. And we had also a small sponsor from Fairfield Council. Also, they donated $1,000 for us. Thank you for Fairfield. I'll leave you with our chair. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to our speakers once again, so Professor Stephanie and Professor Simo Parpola, if we could just give them another round of applause. حاولتم رابع بسيمي قتل توخن رابع قديلا بيخزي توخن مريم انت خزا خوخن لخ قدمي صاد شوا. Yep. As you can share, Thank you.